Thank you, Dr. Finkelstein, for your talk. A lot of these talks and discussions, we have a lot of condemnation of Israel and the U.S., but I don't think enough condemnation of the Muslim rulers. I was just wondering if you could give some details on how, like, the regimes around, like, Egypt, Syria, and other countries play into that are complicit with the slaughter.
The regimes in the Arab world are now behaving pretty much as they did during the Nasser era, where there is a lining up of those governments which are outrightly aligning with the United States and those governments which are seeking out some sort of independent path for the Arab world. I don't think the conduct of the Egyptian government is particularly new. It was pretty much in line with what Egypt has done since 1979, when they signed the peace treaty with Israel. And the only thing is, it's now being done in a more overt fashion. The policy has not substantially changed, I don't think. The best analyses of the war from the Arab world are the analyses that are coming in the almost nightly speeches by the head of Hezbollah, Mr. Nasrallah, or Sheikh Nasrallah. The speeches have been quite shrewd, in my opinion, and it's worth listening at what he has to say, if for no other reason than because Nasrallah has been very emphatic that this is not an Israeli war. He keeps saying this is an American war. It's part of the American desire or aspiration to control the Arab world, and that Israel is only doing the bidding of the United States. It's rather a unique voice in the Arab world because Nasrallah, rightly in my opinion, attaches relatively little importance to the Israel lobby, the Zionist lobby, the Jewish lobby, whatever you want to call it, and he attaches by far the largest amount of importance to the designs of the United States in the region, the designs which are also being executed by the state of Israel. That's pretty much a unique voice in the Arab world, but Nasrallah is also, by a wide margin, the most intelligent of the Arab leaders. It's not saying very much. It's like the tallest building in Plains, Georgia, but he's still a clear-headed and good analyst.
Begin also by thanking you for visiting our campus again. I actually had the privilege to help organize the last event that you attended at UTM, and although the circumstances are tragic, I'm happy to see that the turnout is so huge today, as many people were turned away. So it's a good sign that people are concerned and feel that this situation is particularly urgent as the massacre goes on. My question was relating, actually it was a follow-up to the previous gentleman's question, which is regarding the response that, on the streets of the Arab Muslim world, which has been quite strong, although it's not easily seen in the Canadian media, unfortunately. But there's been a resounding call from neighboring countries and from people in the streets for their own governments to act in the defense of the people of Gaza in sense of military response. Because, as you mentioned, I mean, the international community has systematically failed the Palestinians on and on. So I think that perhaps, or rather, what is your position in the sense of supporting the call from the neighboring countries, from the people of those countries, in mobilizing the forces that Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia have, as they spend actually far more in military than Israel even does? Thank you.
There's been a lot of talk about Israel's right to self-defense, and it should be obvious to any rational or reasonable person. The real issue should be the Palestinian right to self-defense. The Palestinians Palestinian people in Gaza have had to endure a brutal blockade since about 2001. In January 2006, in what's been called the freest and fairest election in the Arab world, they elected Hamas to the government. The results of their experiment with democracy was that the brutal blockade was tightened. Then the United States, Israel, and the so-called Palestinian so-called authority plotted to overthrow that freely elected government. In June 2007, the Hamas government preempted the putsch attempts against them. The consequence for again trying to preserve the results of that freest and fairest election was the escalation, the tightening yet more of that brutal blockade. By November 2007, that is to say, before Hamas started firing the rockets at Israel, before that happened, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Robinson, who went to Gaza, said, what's occurring here is the destruction of a civilization. And so under all those circumstances, and leaving aside the fact that Israel was maintaining its occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, even though the Palestinians, through all of their elected representatives, whether it's the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, had expressed their willingness to peacefully resolve the conflict. So now you have the willingness to resolve the conflict, the escalating, brutal blockade of Gaza, and the question simply is, do Palestinians have some responsibility, moral obligation to peacefully die? Do they have some sort of moral or legal obligation to commit collective suicide? I don't know of any document in international law that imposes that obligation on any people. And we should bear in mind that was also the opinion of Gandhi. People have a very, I think, poor understanding of what Gandhi's opinions were. But we know for certain that in 1937, during the British Mandate, when the Palestinians went into revolt against the British Mandate and the impending ethnic cleansing of their homeland, Gandhi said, I wish Palestinians would have chosen nonviolence. However, he said, according to the accepted standards of right and wrong, Palestinians have the right to resist the illegal encroachment on their country. Well, if Gandhi said they have the right to use violent force to resist those who are occupying their country, far be it for me to say Palestinians don't have that right. So I don't see that there is any reasonable grounds for entering into a debate about whether or not Palestinians have the right of self-defense. I think the answer is obviously yes. The real question is whether it's the best strategy, violent resistance, for achieving their goal. And as I said, I just don't believe now is the time to be discussing that question. And so I'm going to set it aside. At a future date, I'd be happy to express my opinion.